So hi, everyone. My name is Christina, and welcome to DAFilms Conversation Series. These are roughly an hour-long talks where we invite interesting, inspiring, and mainly isolated filmmakers now to have a conversation with us. So this conversation is set up as a Q&A session, so the online audience is encouraged to ask questions in the chat, which should be on the Facebook event page. So we're very happy to have Canadian filmmaker Peter Mettler here with us in the online world. Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Good to hear you. And I guess I should do maybe a short introduction for people who are joining. Peter's a Canadian Swiss filmmaker with a career spanning 40 years. He's made everything from fiction films, experimental documentary, and his films are often characterized as hybrids, although they sort of break all boundaries. And what binds them together is this sort of exploratory spirit and this attempt at capturing what we can call profound experiences. So it's we have the privilege on DAFilms to present a collaboration with Visions de Rio. So 13 of Peter's films are free on our platform, on our VOD platform, until May 2nd. So if some of you have not seen some of Peter's films, now is your chance. So I will provide just a very basic framework for our conversation, and we don't have to stay at all within these limits. We'll just see where the conversation takes us, and hopefully we'll have some participation and questions from the audience along the way that can help flow us in some sort of a direction. So on DAFilms, we right now currently have a program, a curated program about the environment in us. Last week was Earth Day, and before this current pandemic engulfed everything in our lives, there was another crisis. There still is another crisis, the climate and the environment. So we selected films that reflect on our relationship with the natural world and films that ask us to meditate on this relationship. So this is especially important now when many of us are cut off from our natural surroundings, but it's also a unique time. Obviously, it's a unique time where the earth is on pause, and we have a chance to reflect back on the basics before moving forward again. So by basics, I obviously mean the connection, this connection. So we included your film Becoming Animal in this program because it obviously fits very well into this theme. So it's a great starting point for our conversation, but I would like to bring in all of your other work into this conversation as well. So I can start with Becoming Animal because it's your latest work. It's a film by you and Emma Davey. And it traces this journey to Grand Teton Park in North America with the environmental philosopher David Bowie, and it explores how the written word and technology has affected how we see. So maybe you could tell us actually more about the beginnings of this project, how it came to be.
Well, it was actually an idea that was proposed by Emma. We had met working together in a fiction film in a theater adaptation called Tectonic Plates, and she was an actor in that. And I had continued to explore ideas of perception and really using the technology of film in a kind of experiential way. That really addresses some of the senses that we can address using cinema. I'd been doing that for years after we met, and Emma started also making documentary films in that period and came across the books of David and saw some parallels in the work. And so she proposed that we all go to a wilderness location together and see what we could come up with. So that's how the project started. And like you said, David, in his writing is mostly talking about language, talking about the alphabet, words, and how this invention of communication has also separated us from the things that are out there because we formulate words instead of having a direct relationship with what we're seeing. And for Emma and I, the cinema has a very similar effect. In a previous film I made called Picture of Light, it actually addressed this very concretely because it was a film about going to see the Northern Lights, or recording the Northern Lights on film, on celluloid at that time. And I had realized during the making of it, well, actually for many, many people, the only way they will ever understand or experience the Northern Lights is through watching a film. And then extrapolated that to ponder, well, how much of our experience is actually mediated experience? So it became an essay about, you know, how much our consciousness is actually informed by media, by recorded images and sounds. So in any case, it was kind of the idea of going into the wilderness with a camera was paralleling the, I don't know, self-reflexivity that David was talking about with words when he writes a book. We were in a similar kind of condition of ourselves and the environment, our art form in between.
Yeah, it's very concrete, I think, and you can see it in Becoming Animal, this sort of these two conflicting ideas. The idea that the technology is something that's sort of taking, or at least, you know, the screens or these, I think he used the line, we are entranced by our own artifacts. There's you know, taking us away from this natural world, this sensual world, this experience. But on the other hand, you're using technology the same way as David Abram mentioned, the written word, to bring us closer, to sort of engage with this expression, this expressive world. So what kind of visual tools or techniques do you use? Is this something that you had thought of before? Did you plan it out? Did you try it out a few times? Or is this something that over a long period of time you develop this visual language that can sort of achieve this, or can it achieve this goal?
I mean, I think the visual language had been brewing in other films already, but the other films didn't address the topic so specifically. You know, the way we made the film was really step by step. We actually went to the park the first time together, the three of us, with very little money and not a plan of how to make the film, but rather an openness to talk about how we would make a film. And that developed over 3 visits to the park, with editing periods in between, with raising the money to make the film in between. So it was done very much in steps. And that's a nice way to work, because you get to know your subject in a different way. You know, like it matures over time. You look at some of your footage, you work on that, you go back, you add to what you shot. So that's very nice. But one of the things I felt that was special in the process was this whole idea of ourselves being animals. You know, as a filmmaker, as a cameraman, I'm also an animal. And you know, a fairly sophisticated kind of animal that's using camera technology that's been invented by my species as a process of self-reflection on how we relate to nature, how we relate to the things we're looking at. It's pretty sophisticated, but nonetheless, we're an animal, and we're part of the environment that we're walking through. And I think that awareness, that heightened awareness, affected how the camera was used, and it affected how sound was recorded. It was much more a sensorial experience than, let's say, your average film. You know, was very aware of the looking and the listening as it moves through spaces. And that interaction, as David would say, you know, how things are looking back at you while you're looking at them.
So in this way, the camera actually is just a byproduct, or just a product of the natural world, because we invented it. So and we're part of that too. So when David says that he's touching the tree in that shot, and he's saying the tree, I'm touching the tree, but the tree is also touching me. Do you think the camera is also touching you? You're touching the camera.
Well, in a weird way, it is. Yeah, I mean, it's because you're inside of viewfinder, and you're looking out and reacting to the things that are moving around you, and they're affecting you back. So it is an interaction, even if it's through this kind of portal of a recording device. It is a two-way interaction for sure.
Mm-hmm. And we have a question here, which is something, do you typically wait until the end to edit, or do you typically wait until the editing process to write the film? Because right now you're talking about how reflexive the camera work is and how it's the process in stages. So. Yeah.
No, it is exactly that. It's a process in stages. There's, I don't generally like to work with a script that defines everything ahead of time, but definitely like to work with a strategy. Let's say an outline of themes and an outline of subjects to explore. And with each step that you take, you learn more about the things that you're filming, and you start to build associations. You deepen the thematic relationships of things. So it's, for these essay films, at least, it's very much a process of shooting, going back to editing, going back to shooting, going back to editing, and building this thing. And often chronology is very important. Like in Gambling Gods and LSD, and in the project I'm doing now, The Greener Grass. Chronology is one of the structural rules, because I feel there's embedded narratives in the unfolding of experience that may not be so obvious, but they're part of the foundation of how all the meaning accrues together.
Mm-hmm. So what draws you to these themes, like this human connection with the natural world, this human fascination with the natural world, or this attempt to capture it or to engage in it? It's sort of like in a lot of your films, it sort of comes up. You already mentioned Picture of Light, but also, Petropolis or End of Time. This sort of recurring themes. What fascinates you about this?
Well, gee, that's even bigger than a theme, really. That's just plain existence. How we are in this environment that we've been born into. And I think for a long time, since I was a teenager, I had a strong awareness of the natural world that gives us what we have, and a kind of attraction to understanding that better, to seeing more deeply into it, and observing its abuse, I suppose, in many different contexts, whether it's industrial, or whether it's just an individual in their own environment not paying attention to what's going on around them. And why that is, I can't really say. It just is like that.
But there's a difference. I think there's lots of people, maybe not lots of people, but there's enough people that are interested in this sort of making this connection, or this talk, for lack of a better word, I'll say theme. But not everybody seeks to capture it and try to morph it and change it into something else to present it to, let's say, a wider group of people, a wider audience. So it's this sort of like almost transformation that you do. You're getting all these different, sort of capturing all these things, but what is it that drives you sort of to?
Yeah, it's the beauty of the experience. It's the beauty of art. I'm not. I wouldn't say my films, their motor is not necessarily the issue of we shouldn't pollute the earth, right? They're not black and white in that way, but they are very very involved in terms of wonder and artistic expression and what that is. You know, it's like listening to music, beautiful music that moves you a certain way. I'm very excited to create an experience with cinema that is an experience, not just an idea, that takes you somewhere provocative, that fulfills you like music can fulfill you, but can also give you ideas, can make you ask questions, can, you know, make you see relationships differently than before you saw the film. So it's more like an exercise or a meditation or a celebration than it is a you know, political position in terms of being propaganda or something like that.
There is one film that sort of stands out from the rest, and that would be Petropolis, which it's always not. It was done in cooperation with Greenpeace Canada, so it already sort of has a stance right off the bat. It's not like hidden. Can you talk sort of about this, how that cooperation came about?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny, you know, because if Greenpeace didn't have their name on that film, like say you put the name of an oil corporation at the beginning of the film, the oil corporation would go, "Oh, this is pretty good.
It's beautiful.
It shows what we do really well," you know.
Yeah, of course.
So the
context
film,
is everything.
Yeah. So the film itself actually doesn't take a position, let's say in a hard way, to say, "Oh, this is bad." Da, 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 da. It really just shows you this environment. And it gives you some facts about, you know, energy usage and that sort of thing. And then at the very end, there's a voiceover that kind of contextualizes the evolution of oil and energy and flight, because we're flying around in a helicopter, but in fact, you know, we haven't been flying around above the earth, able to look down for very long. And ironically, it's oil that is fueling the helicopter that we're using to film the ground that is contemplating the use of oil, you know. So there's all these paradoxes built into it, which I think is an honest way of looking at the situation. So yes, it is a kind of a politicized film, but at the same time, it's really just observational. And even the aesthetic of it was determined by the fact that we weren't allowed to film on the ground. You know, anytime we would be near the tar sands, the security would come out, and that was the end of it. Whereas legally, we can film from the air. We can look down from above and film. So that determined this kind of aesthetic of the film. And it was not a film that I had planned to make. I was actually researching for The End of Time, which in the early stages was a film about clouds, among other things. And I was interested in what went into the atmosphere, what went into the air. And the tar sands were very interesting for that, of course. And by coincidence, someone from Greenpeace asked if I could recommend a cinematographer. And so I volunteered. And then one thing led to another. And we ended up, you know, hiring sophisticated equipment in order to get those images from above. And when I saw that footage, I proposed to Greenpeace that I might make a film out of that material in the way that I make films. What do they think? You know, and they were open to it. So for them, it was a very different kind of film than they're used to. But I think they also saw that it, you know, it got a lot of play in a way that they weren't used to. Also, because it wasn't propaganda, it was really more meditative.
Yeah, I think there's something about leaving those spaces open for people to sort of fill their own thoughts into. How there's the, you know, long takes, and like there's just a lot of like space for people to sort of come to their own conclusions or explore their own feelings while watching it. Because it's pretty overwhelming. At least for me, it was pretty overwhelming to see. It's not something we're used to seeing, especially not from that perspective, right?
Yeah, me too. I mean, when I saw it for the first time from a helicopter above, I thought, oh, wow, like people actually don't know how big this place is.
Mm-hmm.
And that was also the reason for doing long takes, so you can understand with one camera move, you understand the relationship of space. Yeah. Whereas if you were editing, if you made that into cuts, you wouldn't have those relationships anymore.
Yeah, I remember just seeing it and seeing the pictures of that's not the word, the dump trucks that look like little ants, and they're just the shot just follows them, and it just doesn't. They're just not going. It's not that they're not going anywhere, but they're just going forever.
It's endless.
It's just endless. They're not. So I'll ask another question from the audience. Victoria asks, hello, I was curious about your collaborations with Andreas Zust. How have you decided to work together, and what was the thing that unified you as a team?
So Andreas Zust is an old friend who passed away many years ago, 2000, I think it was. He was an eccentric artist and meteorologist who I had the lucky fortune of meeting just at a dinner with some common friends. And he was eccentric enough to propose that we make a film together after knowing each other only 2 hours. And he saw that I was from Canada, was a filmmaker, and he was fascinated with the Northern Lights as a meteorologist, and proposed that we go to Churchill, Manitoba, a very far north place where the Northern Lights can be seen at their most brightest and most often. And we embarked on this journey together, and it was quite amazing to work with him because he had this dual nature of being an artist and being a scientist. And he also, he was kind of the producer on the film, but he was a very unusual producer in that he was like, yeah, just do what you have to do, make the film that you need to make, and explore, take it in stages. We took it in stages. We didn't know at the outset what it would be, and that was actually a great gift for me to be able to work like that at that point in my life, and it led into working methodologies afterwards that I really value a lot, thanks to that.
Yeah, that's interesting, giving the opportunity to have that, right? To be able to explore and experiment without any sort of major strings attached, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a healthy balance between being prepared, having strategies. You still have the budget, you still have to organize, and you can't just go out and film nothing or film everything. But there's a balance to be had in terms of having your strategies and going out with an openness to see what fits, because the things that you discover usually are much more interesting than the things you thought of or researched when you were at home on your desk, working on your desk.
There must have been a great deal of trust between you two.
I guess so. It was bizarre, the whole thing.
It comes across in the film a bit. Yeah. I'll take another question. So this is from Gabriel. I really enjoyed The End of Time and Gambling, and I see you have a special connection with India. How do you perceive or worked with the audiovisual tools the idea of delusion related to life and death?
Delusion?
Delusion.
The delusion of life and death? Is that a delusion?
Maybe it's illusion. Maybe it's just a typo.
Yeah. That's a hard question. I mean, India. I can talk about India personally. For me, I had been to India already quite young, in my 20s, and I loved being thrown into that culture and chaos, because it felt like it took me back into a time of the past that we don't have in the culture that I'm familiar with, namely, Toronto and Zurich. Something before modernity, and also an incredible awareness of spiritual matters, even if some of it has become ritualized or materialized. There's an awareness, I guess, that sort of saturates the everyday, that also looks at nature and God as equivalent. So these were things that really just fascinated me as a counterpoint to the sort of more stringent, organized cultures of Switzerland and Canada. I also, when you talk about life and death, I found myself to be very aware of the edge of life and death when I was in India. By some of the things I saw, some of the conditions that people were living in, but even myself, the tentative, possibility of just being snuffed out at any time was more obvious there. And also in terms of working methodologies, I was really influenced in a positive way there, I think, by the fact that whatever you intend to do, you can't do it because it doesn't work out the way you thought it would. And I really embraced that, actually. I like that, that at the beginning of a day, you may be setting out to do something, but it's not going to work out that way. So you have to surf. You surf the day, you surf the things that are unfolding. And sure enough, the thing that, is in your heart or that you're interested in manages to magically appear, often in ways that you hadn't expected. So India taught me a lot about that, about going with the flow and letting things unfold.
That's really interesting because that influences a lot of. I mean, you can see that influence in a lot of your films. That sort of improvisational, sort of that state of being sort of really present. In a lot of the images, it's very like present. It's very much in like the now, or in the now that you were. I mean, it's obviously not, but in your now when you were filming, the now when you were filming.
that now from
that
then.
Now, not now. But is that something really important for you when you're behind the camera? That being in the present moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of a practice, if you will, and I mean it might be influenced from my small experience of music, of having played the piano for several years when I was younger. This idea of being present with your instrument of expression, I guess, or in this case, it's expression and capture. So to bring yourself to a point with the camera where the camera is actually part of your being, part of an extension of your senses, and to be seeing and hearing into the space that you're in and responding to that, I think, well, it's a lovely state to be in, first of all. and it very often results in something that captures that situation well, because if you're not connecting and you're not moving the camera the right way, what are the chances that it will work in a cinema for its audiences? They're not that high.
So on that topic, we have a question about music in your films. So how did the music take form for Pictures of Light, for example? It seems that the music has a presence in your films with its own qualities.
Yeah, each film is a bit different, but I do like to work with all the elements simultaneously, whether that's in filming, being aware of the sounds that are in the environment that I'm filming in, and recording them and collecting them, but also in editing, that there's a parallel pursuit towards what is spoken, what is heard in ambience, what is heard in musical tones, and what is happening in picture. All those things are being edited at the same time, right from the beginning. Because to me, they're a whole. They're not separate things. They're working off each other. And in the case of Picture of Light, that actually probably wasn't so true. In fact. Picture of Light was edited, first of all, it was celluloid, so we were editing film on a Steenbeck, which is it's more difficult to have that fluid interrelationship of the elements. And I was looking for something quite particular, and was introduced to Jim O'Rourke by somebody in a record store in Zurich. And some of Jim's more ambient things that he did early on in his career, and they were perfect. Like, they evoked a kind of tone that within it had all this kind of intricate detail that were like stories unto themselves, and they really had an association with the Northern Lights for me. And so I met Jim and asked him if I could use his tracks, but have the original breakdown of the tracks, before they're all mixed together, because his pieces were very long and the film is only 83 minutes. So I took his basic stem tracks and re-edited them to picture, and basically remixed them with different sounds from the real world, and created a new composition out of pieces of his music. So that's how it went for Picture of Light. Like I say, each film is a bit different.
But you work a lot with both. You work at them simultaneously. Yes. The picture and the editing.
That's right. Yeah.
And do you collaborate in any of your films? Actually, have you collaborated in the editing process, or do you usually?
In terms of music, or in terms of?
In terms of editing, actually.
Yeah, usually. I mean, Gambling Gods and LSD was with Roland Schlimme, and we edited for a long time on that, and he would work during the day and I would work at night. So we were kind of almost editing 24 hours a day.
Well, you have so much footage that I can imagine you must have been doing that for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, we were working through a lot of things for sure. I don't like editing with an editor, like sitting together with an editor and editing. I do that very rarely, but I like tag teaming with editors for sure. And there's usually a point in the film where I go over the whole thing, where I sort of feel like I need to have the balanced overview, and then also in the audio mixing stages, I'm all the way through that. So I do have my hands in the whole edit, but during the process there are collaborators both in sound and picture who work on different sequences and things like that. Yeah.
So brings a different perspective to you as well.
Also, yeah, because sometimes people edit, editing is also kind of improvisational in the documentary world. Like, you start going into the material, discovering what's there, and you don't see it before you actually engage with it. It's through the working of it that things start to emerge that sometimes are very surprising and fantastic.
So you actually also do live improvisations with some of the footage. I'm guessing from what I recall you telling me that with Gambling Gods and Lust, you had a lot of this extra footage that you then also used to make these sort of live improvisational like sessions and shows and work. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this, if this is something still, this world.
Well, that started during Gambling Gods, which was 2001. And prior to that, I used to play in a kind of band where we would have a room that was full of musical instruments, and I had recorded a lot of sound on different formats of tape, environmental sound and any kind of sound really. And I had like 4 or 5 tape players and all reel-to-reel tapes and cassette tapes, and I would put them all in and push play on everything. So all this sound would be rolling, and it would be going through a mixer, and then I would monitor what was in the mixer and mix things, isolate certain sounds, and bring them into the mix of the room, where these 2 musicians would react to what they heard, and I would react back to what they heard. So it was this kind of jam with sound, and I carried that into picture mode when it became possible. First using tape, VHS tape and DVDs and mini DV tapes, and that was around the time of editing Gambling Gods, to try and bring this kind of live performative element into editing, into picture editing. And since then, of course, there's been a huge development in the art form they call VJing, and there's many different softwares and many different modes of expression for doing that now. And I was involved in helping develop a software through Touch Designer called Mixa with Greg Hermanovich, who's the owner of the company Derivative. And it's quite an amazing piece of software where you can have multi-channels of different clips that you load in on the fly, and have a lot of control in terms of how you blend them and manipulate them. And it becomes a kind of musical instrument for live performance of images and sound. And I've been doing different shows with this, ranging from, symphony orchestra to techno raves to on-stage performance with the sort of one that we did the most recently was with Jeremy Narby, who's an anthropologist, and Franz Streichler from the band The Young Gods. So we would have this show that was about an hour that was performed entirely live. So it's something that started as a hobby and a kind of reaction to more traditional forms of editing, and became more like a parallel pursuit to my filmmaking now.
So were you involved in, that was the last thing you said you had done, recently, the live performance. You're not developing anything now while in isolation?
Well, I'm actually, for the Vision de Real on Friday, I'm going to perform our show, if you will, with them and Jeremy. So there'll be a camera showing how it all works, and that's, I think, at 10 o'clock European time.
10 o'clock European time on Friday.
Yeah,
this Friday. Yeah, and so you'll be live mixing.
Yeah,
sort of like we're live talking,
which is sort of absurd because the whole idea of the live mixing was that it was live, because film is anyway kind of destined to be an object on your computer or in a cinema. And the idea was to bring in some kind of live element to that performance. So it's a bit absurd that it ends up being on
like recorded
on a live stream again. Yeah.
You could always say that you'd want to destroy all recorded evidence of the of the performance, but don't do that, because we all want to see it, of course, if we don't.
I'm not sure I follow, but I'll just nod my head.
Yeah. So I have another question here that I skipped over, but I think you perhaps answered this one a little bit, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about it. It's about your work process. Are you do you gather a lot of, are you the type of filmmaker that gathers a lot of material, you shoot a lot, or are you quite specific and you sort of pre-distill the quality and the quantity of the material you gather during the shooting? So I assume maybe every project is a little different.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if you look at Petropolis, it's it was shot in a few hours, and it has like a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 shooting ratio. Or Eastern Avenue, it's almost 1.1-to-1 shooting ratio. It's like a true diary. Whereas Gambling Gods and LSD, our assembly of the usable material was 55 hours long. And the project I'm doing now, The Greener Grass, is a series. So it's a series of 50-minute or so 1-hour films. So you can imagine the bulk of that material would be much larger as well. I think what maybe is a tendency in the bigger projects is that there's scenes shot. They're not shot excessively. Like there's not a lot of coverage on single scenes, but the scenes get dropped out of the final product. So there's maybe more scenes than usual, but not an excessive amount of shooting on each scene. I think you could say that that's a tendency. I tend to just shoot and not repeat things in the documentary situation.
Okay. Can you tell us about what you're working on now? You mentioned a series, or?
Yeah, I've been exploring this idea of the expression, the grass is always greener on the other side. What that means to different people in different situations and different cultures. It turns out it's quite a good phrase to hang a lot of exploration onto.
Yeah.
Including right now when we're all, self-isolating and taking our lives into account, reflecting on our own existence and on what's going on in the greater world, how we've been affecting it, and imagining the other side of this pandemic. Imagining what will come out, how we will come out of it afterwards.
I always thought the grass is greener on the other side also has that sort of connotation that things are better somewhere else, or in what sort of?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. You can read it like that,
yeah,
for sure.
Or how did you read it?
That you're not happy with what you have and it's going to be better somewhere else, or your neighbor's grass is greener. But I'm also interested in, the more positive aspects of it, in that, we want to understand things better. We want to explore. We want to go further. We want to better integrate into the lives we have, into the understanding of the life that we live in, the environment that we live in. Yeah.
And do you think that that's what's going to come out of this pandemic? Is this the viewpoint you've?
It's a hard question, I mean, what I have found to be the case a lot in the year where I've been talking to people is many people say, actually, I like where I am. I like the situation I'm in. I don't long for something else. I want to make my life a better place. And I mean, I think during this pandemic also, I've heard from a lot of people, oh, this is a chance to, almost take a kind of spiritual practice position around our isolation, and to contemplate and be aware of who we are and how we can be better. If that's going to happen in the big picture, that's a really hard one. Yeah, we don't know where this is going.
No, but we can speculate.
Yeah.
Depending if you're an optimist or a pessimist.
Yeah.
So we have another question. Can you speak about your relation with David Abram? Because that fits into this whole spiritual exploration.
Well, we sort of did, didn't we, at the beginning?
Yeah, I think maybe what it was like working alongside or collaborating. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that collaboration, how that took place. Yeah. If it was like you bounced off ideas off his writings, or like what kind of conversations sort of What was the flow?
Well, I think, you know, for anyone who's read his books, you can see that the books cover a lot of different ground that would require a much lengthier film or even a series of films to cover in the same way. And you also see in David's writing that he's a wordsmith, you know, he's a poet. He has great joy in intricate sentences and the unfolding of the sentences and what they conjure, which is very different than cinema, you know. And one of the things that we, you know, initially encountered in working together is, you know, you can't really, unless you're making a performance film, you can't really have David on camera talking at great length or performing at great length his writing. That wouldn't be the point, at least, that Emma and I were interested in. We were much more interested in the sensuous qualities of what cinema can give you, like as extensions of the senses. So I think probably the kind of focal point and one of the most interesting points of engagement between David and us was exactly that, was, you know, someone who works with words and someone who works with images and sounds, and finding this kind of sweet spot where the two were working together. And then ultimately, you know, the film addresses a few of David's ideas and a few of our ideas, and that's it. You know, it's relatively short and concise compared to the totality of his ideas in his books.
Yeah, I liked how it's almost a very like a conversation between you, and with one being the spoken word and the other being the images. That sometimes it was sometimes they paralleled each other, and sometimes it was a counter, like a sort of like a counterpoint.
Yeah.
So I think that must have taken quite a lot of thought to think about how to put these different components together.
Yeah, a lot of editing, you know, finding the balance.
Finding the balance, yeah. So I have one last question. Do you draw any parallels between natural spaces and urban spaces in the sense of their evolution and collapse? Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I love actually the combination of natural space and urban space as seen by nature taking over a construction that's been made by humans. Decay. Some people would call it decay, but in fact, it's a kind of growth, isn't it? You know,
Rebirth.
Yeah, it's a transformation. So, like many people, I'm fascinated by observing that, by observing those transitions in a city like Detroit, for example, you know, where you have greenery penetrating these old buildings and starting to take it over. And it's also fascinating to see anything that's built by humans out of anything in the natural world, you know, whether it's an old stone ruin or whether it's a rocket silo or whether it's, you know, one of our modern glass buildings. They're sort of in incredible structures that are still part of nature, that still use resources from nature to function, that still, you know, are wired with electricity, that is still somehow created from the minds of physicists. It's always an incredible thing to understand these constructions relative to the natural forces that allowed them to happen.
Yeah, I always find that even the term nature or natural world is really tricky for me to use, and whenever I use it, I find I sort of stop and I think, well, what actually is, you know, what's that line between the natural world and you know, and I don't know, the human world, because, you know,
that's one of the first things that's stated in Becoming Animal, that question, you know, what is this thing we call nature? And why do we even have this idea of nature being outside of us? You know, it's like us and nature, but it's not us and nature. It's us. It's nature and nature. It's so we're one and the same thing.
Reflecting on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question. How does the cinematography differ depending on whether you direct yourself or you shoot for another director?
I mean, working with other directors, of course, it depends if it's a drama or a documentary to begin with, where a language is determined for the film that it is going to be shot, which happens in any case. And I mean, I think when I'm shooting on my own, I'm maybe a little bit more free to waste my own time as opposed to waste other people's time potentially. I don't find it as a waste of time, but I like exploring. I like going down roads and exploring things where I don't know what's going to show up, which is you know, a little different when you're working with someone who may have a greater idea of the focus that they want, of what they want to get out of it. It all depends on the relationship and the particularities of the film. But certainly my job as a cinematographer with a director is to try and do, to try and serve that vision, whatever that vision may be, and however conscious that vision may be in the particular director. It's not always that conscious. It sometimes finds itself in the process.
Okay, we have one last question, and you're gonna like this one. Your films are very honest, deep, and inspiring. What is the best thing in life for you? Don't say your cat.
I don't have a cat.
Oh.
What is the best thing in life for me is probably being in the moment. I mean, that sounds cliche, but I think we all know that feeling. You know, to be present and appreciative of where we are right now. And, you know, that's a tricky paradox with filmmaking, because we're trying to catch those moments, but as you catch it, it becomes something of the past that is going to be watched in the future. So we're actually like dealing with a strange kind of time machine at the same time as we're celebrating being in the moment. But that's the long answer. The short answer is being in the moment.
Okay. Well, I think that's a really good question to end this talk on. I'm just going to remind people who are watching now that 13 of your films are available for free stream on DAFilms. So people should go check that out if you haven't yet. And also that you'll be doing a masterclass with Vision Studio this Friday. And I think you said it's at 10 p.m. That's the European time. Or,
that's the mixing show. That's the Swiss time. But the master class is at 3 p.m.
Okay, sorry. So the mixing show.
There's two parts. There's the master class with Jean and Emmanuel, who will be talking with me, and then that same night, in my living room upstairs, I will do a mixing show that starts at 10 p.m. Swiss time.
So we get to see another room in your house.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing your other work that comes out of this whole situation in this life. Okay. Well, goodbye. And thanks, online audience, for watching.
Bye.